Good evening. Hope all of you are doing well here in the room and online. We're getting started tonight with Maseches Eruvin Daf Kuf Beis, starting at the Mishnah, 5 lines from the bottom on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. We'll be learning Daf Kuf as well as Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, and we will go approximately 2/3 of the way down on Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, not quite the whole Amud. I just had a little bit more of a packed day today, which made it a little harder to prepare everything the way in full, to add in all of the preparatory parts for the rest of the Amud. So we will be stopping there on Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, about 2/3 of the way down. Let's get started. So we're on Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. And the Gemara here is going to discuss a variety of different types of locks. Now, the locks that they had back in the day certainly didn't have the same integrity as the ones that we have. And basically, the type of system that they used to use, one of the systems they used to use, is if there was a loop coming off of the door and a loop coming off of the hinge, they'd overlap and they would put a peg in between them. So that's how we open here today. Nagar, if you have this type of peg with sheyesh barosho glustera, it was a peg with a ball at the end. A ball, it was all together as one piece, and then you could slide it in and it wouldn't fall through the hole. And that's how they would use a lock. Again, taking the loop from the door and the loop from the door frame and putting that peg inside, and then the glustera, the ball at the top of the peg, would kind of hold it in place. And is that considered muktzah or not? This kli, this little peg with a ball on the top, is that considered muktzah? So that's subject to a machlokes tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer otzer, Rabbi Yosi mati. Rabbi Eliezer says that is muktzah. Rabbi Yosi says it's fine. Where did they get their shitas from? So the Mishnah tells us exactly where they got their shitas from. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, how can you say matir? Ma'aseh b'knesses shebetveria. There was a story in the knesses in the shul in Tveria. Shahayu noagin boheter. People were being lenient with this nagar, with this type of peg with the ball on top. Ad sheba Rabban Gamliel v'hazikenim v'asur lahen, until people came along, Rabban Gamliel and others, to say, sorry, nothing doing. You're not allowed to use this. It's actually muktzah. So Rabbi Eliezer has a great marimakom. That's beautiful. How then can Rabbi Yossi be the dissenting opinion here? So then the Mishnah finishes with Rabbi Yossi's shita. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Isser nagu, but you got the story backwards. Initially, people said it was Asr, and then Uva Rabban Gamliel v'azikenim v'itiru lahem. So machlokes in the Tanaim and machlokes in the Metzias of what had actually happened earlier. Did it first start out the Isser and then become Mutter, or did it first start out the Heter and then become Asr? We don't know which story is correct, and that concludes our Mishnah. And now we're going to analyze. Bottom line, Kuf Aleph Amud Beis. Says the Gemara as follows: Benital beigudo kuleal malo pligi. When this peg with a ball that's used to stop to lock a door, when it is beigudo, let's take a look at Rashi to get his language here. 2 lines from the bottom. Dibur hamaschel benital beigudo kshehu kashur, when it's tied v'talui bechevel shel kayama. It's tied to a rope that is permanent. Namely, it's a very strong rope. It doesn't mean it lasts forever. It just means that it's a permanent rope. It's not a gentle rope. It's not like a piece of dental floss that when you pull it'll break. It's a strong, let's call it a braided rope, a strong rope. So that's what the Gemara says. Everyone agrees in our Mishnah that would be mutter. That's not considered to be muktzah because that thing is attached to the wall effectively, and things that are attached to the building, that's not muktzah. That's mechubar lekarka effectively, and that's not where the machlokas is. Kipligi, where do Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Eliezer have their arguments? As we turn to the top of Kuf Beis Maral, b'she'enu nital beigudo, when they are not attached to a very strong rope. When this peg with a ball on top, the nagar, which has a glustera on top, when do we have the machlokas? That's when there is no strong rope that's attaching it. What's the analysis? Demar savar, one person holds in our Mishnah, kevan diyesh barosho glustera toras kliyalav. It has the din of a kli, and therefore it's mutter. Umar savar kevan de'eno nital beigudo, since it cannot be, since it's eno nital beigudo, it doesn't have this rope on it, then it's not allowed to be used. That's the machlokas that we have in our Mishnah. Now, the next Mishnah deals with another type of peg, and you need Rashi to help clarify the difference. Nagar hanigrar noalin bo b'mikdash. If you have a peg, and in this case, the peg doesn't have the ball on the top like the previous Mishnah, and we needed Rashi for this. This is not implicit in the Mishnah at all. certainly not explicit. Rashi says, Dibur Hamaschel Nagar Hanigrar Shekashur Bedeles, that it is tied to the door. Aval Eno Talui Behachevel Aruch. It's not with a long rope. Umitoch Shenigrar, and because it drags on the ground, the rope is longer. Eno Nira Kikashur Ucheshe'ein Berosho Glustera Ka'amar. So we're talking about a peg, literally just a peg. I guess it would look kind of like a number 2 pencil, just a peg. So maybe you couldn't do it this way between 2 holes like this. You have 2 overlapping holes. Maybe they were sideways and you're just kind of sticking it in, you're jamming it in to make sure that the door doesn't swing open. Fine. So this is talking about a regular peg. There is a rope, but it's not a strong rope. And Rashi adds in so much color to this Mishnah, it would be so difficult to understand this Gemara without Rashi. So Nagar HaNigrar, if this peg with no ball at the top, it's loosely tied. There we say Noalin Bo B'Mikdash. In the Beis HaMikdash, you're allowed to use it to lock things up. We actually saw this earlier in Shas and Maseches Shabbos, that you're allowed to use as a lock, this little peg, no problem, with no glustra. It's tied, but it's not tied with a heavy rope, no problem, can be used, but only b'mikdash. However, aval lo b'medina. As some background, whenever we see the language of mikdash and medina, we have to remember the following principle of ein shvus b'mikdash. What that means is that in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, for a variety of reasons, as mentioned in the Rishonim, possibly because Kohanim's reasoning, because the Kohanim were very well versed and they were very careful and conscientious. So therefore, there was no concern that they were going to violate an Isur D'Oraisa, and therefore there were no Isuri D'Rabbanan. So that's why we have a leniency in the Mikdash, but in the Medina, outside of that space, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, we would not have the leniency. So the first din of this Mishnah says that this peg that's dragging on the ground, the peg without a ball at the end that's used as a lock, can only be used in the Mikdash. It really should be an Isur D'Rabbanan, but we don't have Ein Shvus B'Mikdash, so we therefore allow it in the Mikdash, but we would not allow it in the Medina. V'hamunach kan v'kan. But if it's lying on the ground, no strings that are attached to this peg, so then you have no heter at all. The only heter we would have had, according to the Tanakhama, is if it would have been tied to something. Here we don't see that, and if it's lying on the ground, just mamish sitting on its own, usr. That you're not allowed to use even in the mikdash. L'chora, that might even be an isur d'oraisa, because otherwise it should have been mutter in the mikdash. It could be boneh, it could be makeh b'patish, could be a whole variety of things. So yeah, if you take a look at Rashi below, 2 inches down, 3 inches down, Dibur Hamaschel v'hamunach, this is still within the Tanakhama. What does he say? She'eno kashur klal, it's not connected at all to the building. Then have a binyan mamish. Then it would be an isur d'oraisa of boneh. You're not allowed to do that. And when it's attached to a string, it reduces that isur d'oraisa to an isur d'rabbanan. Good. That's the sheet of the Tanakhama. Rabbi Yehuda was more lenient than the Tanakhama, as we will see here and in another Mishnah that we'll learn tonight. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Hamunach, if it's resting on the ground entirely, then mutter b'mikdash. He says it's not an isur d'oraisa. It's totally mutter to do that, but only in the mikdash. It's only an isur d'rabbanan ein shvus b'mikdash, because there's no rabbinic injunctions in the mikdash. Therefore, that's permissible. B'hanigrar b'medina, and when it's dragging on the rope, that which the Tanakhama had said was mutter only in the mikdash, he allows everywhere. So basically, when it comes to munach, he's a level more lenient, whereas the Tanakhama would have said it's forbidden. He allows it only b'mikdash, but not in the case of Medina, and as opposed to Rabbi Yehuda, who drops everything down one notch and says that it's one step more lenient. We're right now starting the Gemara, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, about 8 lines down. Says the Gemara as follows. Now the brisa we're about to learn is a little more lengthy and a little more colorful than our Mishnah, but the content, the shitas, are identical. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis have taught us. Where do we have a case of this peg which is lying on the ground? It's dragging on the ground, where it's no'alin b'mikdash. We're allowed to use it in the Beis HaMikdash, but not in the Medina. So the Tanakhama, remember what our Tanakhama said above, we're going to see similar answers. The Tanakhama answers, Kol shekashur v'talui v'rosho echad magia la'aretz. It's where this peg, again without a glustra, it's just a peg that's being used as a lock, and it is tied and connected to the wall. So then that's the case that he says would be the case. Rabbi Yehuda argues, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, this is all part of the brisa. Ze'af b'Medina mutter. He said, no, that's even mutter in the Medina, as we saw in our Mishnah, that he was more lenient by the case of Nigrar in the Medina. Ezehu nagar sheno'al b'mikdash shavalo b'Medina. Rabbi Yehuda now says his own shita. I'm going to ask your same question, but I didn't agree with your answer. What is the case of a nagar, of this peg that's being used as a lock? where we say that Noalim b'mikdash, you're allowed to use it to lock a door in the mikdash, but not in the Medina, not outside the Beis HaMikdash? Answers the Gemara, Kol she'eno, lo kashur v'lo taloi. It's not tied at all. And v'shomto umanicho b'karen zav. It says mamish lying on the ground. That's mutter in the mikdash and not mutter in the Medina. And that's the end of our Mishnah above. Very, very similar shita. So says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, the Amora Rabbi Yehuda, it says in the name of Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Yehuda, like the Tana, binigrar. And how does he hold binigrar? He holds that the case of nigrar, if you look at the very end of the Mishnah, the last few words of the Mishnah, 6 lines down, it says, v'hanigrar b'medina, that if there's a string attached to a kli, that's used as a lock, and it's hanging on the ground, that's mutter. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rava, Rava says, "V'hu shekasher b'delas." When, remember, if our Mishnah says in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, we say that it's permissible for one to, it's permissible for within Rabbi Yehuda's world, and even in a Medina, it's permissible if there's a peg that's dragging on the ground, there's a string that's attached to the door, so that's permissible. But Rava gives a qualifier here. Yes, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tana. However, Amar Rava, 1/3 of the way down, Kuf Beis Amud Aleph, Amar Rava, Husha Kashur B'Deles. Where is it tied to? Is the peg tied to the door, or is it tied to the door frame? So says Rabbi, it has to be that it's tied to the door. Says the Gemara, Eini, what are you talking about? That's not true. Rabbi Tavla, Ikla leMechoza. Rabbi Tavla went to the city of Mechoza. Dechaza lehahu to have a tali beibra dedasha, and he saw that it was tied to the door frame. Velo amar luhu velo midi, and there we saw that it was not tied to the door like Rava said. So how could Rava be right? Rava said that the only way Rabbi Yehuda would be matir is if this stick is tied to the door. Yet we see Rav Tavla saw a case in Mechoza where it was not tied to the door, it was tied to the door frame. How could Rava be right? Says the Gemara, Hahu nital be'igudo. This is how we started today, that we're talking about in that case where we said it was mutter in Mechoza, where in Rabbi Tavla's case, that rope was a more permanent rope. And that, as we started our Gemara on the very bottom of Kuf Aleph Amud Beis, when it comes to nital be'igudo kulei alma lo pligi, everyone agrees that that's mutter. That's mamish part of the building, nothing to be concerned about. Next, Rabbi Avia, Ikla leNaharda. Rabbi Avia went to Naharda. Chazye lehahu gavra dehava kakater begemi, and he saw that there was a stick that was tied up with a gemi, with a reed, a very flimsy type of connection. Omar dain lo nitrok. This will not work. This rope is not considered strong enough to count. Take a look at Rashi. Rashi's 2 inches below where we are, approximately halfway down within the Rashi's Dibur HaMaschil, Dein lo nitrok zeh lo yin ol she'eno kashur. This is not considered a tie at all. This is not considered a knot in the least, in any form. To command delese legemidam. It's as if there's nothing there. So even according to Rabbi Yehuda, who's matir in our mission in the case of Nigrar, where there's some type of string attachment from either the door, or from the door, according to Rabbi within Rabbi Yehuda, from the door and it's hanging on the ground, it has to be more significant than a gemi, more significant than a reed. Next, almost halfway down in the Gemara, Boy Reb Zera nikmaz mahu. What about nikmaz? So I'll just be brief because we just don't have a lot of time. But nikmaz is sometimes you'll see in a door where, like when a door swings, you kind of want it to like sit in the right place. So you make a hole in the ground over here, and there's a peg that sticks out from the bottom. And then as your door swings, it kind of clips into the hole and it sinks in. And now your door is kind of stuck here. That's nikmaz, is where there's a hole in the ground, not in the door, it's all attached. So can you use that on Shabbos? So that's what the Gemara wants to know. What about nikmaz? The Rishonim explained this way, Rashi here as well at length. So the Gemara says, what about nikmaz? Again, we're approximately halfway down. What kind of question is that? You don't remember everything you've learned. Lo shmiele, you didn't hear hadatanya nishmat aser. If the string to the rope tears, then you're stuck. Nikmaz mutter. But if it's going to go into a hole in the ground and be attached to the door, no problem. Rabbi Yehuda in the same brisa, Rabbi Yehuda Amar nikmaz afal pishe Eino nishmat aser, even if it's still attached, we would still say it's aser. And going to the Amoraim from this brisa of Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel halacha Rabbi Yehuda v'nikmaz, that we paskin that it's aser b'time of mai. Why would we not allow this? Why would we not allow it to dip into the ground like that? Amar Abai mishum demechze kibone, because this mamish looks like you're building something. It's getting stuck in the ground. What you're doing looks too formal, too official. So that's what the Gemara answers Reb Zera. Obviously, it's going to be aser because Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel paskins like Rabbi Yehuda the Tana in the Brisa, who says that nikmaz is aser. 4 lines, 5 lines before the wide lines. Ba'amine Rav Nechumi bar Zechariah me Abaye. We're in the 4th century of the Amoraim here. Here, what is the case? Asulo beis yad mahu. What if you made a handle to this little key? Now it's not just a peg anymore, but it's a peg with a handle. So that kind of, if you give something a beis yad, we've seen this language in Shabbos, something that has a handle is like a real kli. That's a real kli. So then maybe it should be mutter. So it says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nechumi, bar ada asalo, oh sorry, I skipped a line. Amar, no I didn't, Mahu, what's the din? Amar le, buchna ka'amris. You're talking about this type of thing that's used to crush grains during the week that has a handle. But you're not going to just smack it with the thing. You're going to hold a handle and then crush it. It's kind of like a hammer. There's a handle and then there's the hard part of the hammer. Good. So it has a handle. So you're saying this is basically a buchna. Rashi says this is used to crush wheat. So it says the Gemara, if that's what your question is, then itmar. We already have a statement in the Amoraim. Amar Rav Nechumi bar Ada asalo beis yad mutter. It's permissible. What's kind of funny is that the person they're quoting is the person who asked the question. Abaye spit back to him, you said this. So that's why you'll see here that there are some girsa changes that are not so simple. If you take a look here, it says, Amar Rav Nechuni Barada Amar Shmuel, that he was quoting from somebody else. It wasn't his own thing, and maybe he slipped his mind. But to say that he was the one who came up with the Chiddush himself wouldn't have made sense, because he himself was the one who asked the question. Maybe he forgot. Not so simple. 2 lines before the wide lines, Hahu Sharisa, there was a very large bench or a board that was used as a bench. Dahava Be Rebbe Pidas, that was used in the house of Rebbe Pidas. Dahava Midlule Beasar. It took 10 people to lift it up. Very, very heavy. The Shadule Adasha. And they would use it as a door. They'd prop it up and they'd use it to block the door. So says the Gemara, Velo Amar Lahu Velo Midi. Rebbe Pidas did not seem to think that there was any problem with that. So maybe that should be muksa. Amar, they said, Torah's kli aleha. No, we treat it like a kli. It's being used as a kli. We treat it like a kli. Good. Next case. Hahu asisa. There was this very large bull. De havas be Mar Shmuel. That was in the home of Mar Shmuel. De hava machzekes adriba. Machlokes in the gears here, adriba, ardaba, and if you look in the Hagos V'Tzionim, he says it's shtei lesech. It's just a very large shear, however big it is, was a large bowl. Shara Mar Shmuel lemishde adasha, and he used it to block the door as well. He would lift up this bowl. Maybe if you could envision one of these very large bathing bowls for birds, made out of cement, and maybe there's water spitting up in the middle. These like very, very large bowls. They're heavy, so you can flip it up to use it to block the door. No problem. Omar, why? Torah's kli aleha, because it has the din of a kli, and therefore it's mutter to use. Next case, at the 2 dots, 15 lines from the bottom. Shalach le Rami bar Yechezkel Rav Amram. Now we're going to switch gears altogether, and we're going to be speaking about some of the dinim of ohel, making a tent on Shabbos when we are not allowed and when we are allowed. Of course, we can't make a tent on Shabbos. That's an Isser D'Oraisa. However, there are times that it's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, and there are times that it's mutter altogether. Now, one of the fundamental features of an ohel, and we learned about this in Maseches Shabbos in regards to a case of Tumah V'Tara, of Tumas Ohel, is that in order for Tumas Ohel to transfer, so let's say that my pen is a branch. This is a cemetery, and there's a Kohen standing right here. So if this branch is less than a tefach, there's no din ohel. It has to be at least a tefach. So that's a fundamental din in regards to the status of an ohel. And let's see how all of that plays in. Shalach le Rami bar Yechezkel Rav Amram. Name alan mar, please tell me, my master, please tell me, may halin mili, from these words, ma'al yasa, these wonderful words of Torah, to amris la mishmei de Ravasi, that you said in the name of Ravasi, bekipe de arba, in regards to coverings on boats. Please tell me. So shalach le, he sent to him, hachi amar Ravasi. This is what Ravasi said. I know what you're asking about. This is what Ravasi said. We're about 15, 12 lines from the bottom of the page. Hani kipi de arba, there are these coverings that were put on boats. Bisman sheyesh bahen tefach, when the top part of the covering, even if it looks kind of like a teepee, but if the top part, the bar at the top that's holding up the fabric, is at least a tefach, bisman sheyesh tefach inami or ein baim tefach, there isn't a tefach, but ve'ein bein zel shlosha, you have lavud, all of the cross beams at the top are within 3 tefachim of one another. Then the machar, maybe machatzalos, you can bring mats uporis and you can cover it even on Shabbos. Why are you allowed to cover it on Shabbos? There's holes at the top. And the answer is because once, I mean, this is a principle we'll see explicitly, says the Gemara, my time of why is this allowed? Because Mosif al ohel arai, Mosif al ohel arai hu v'shaper, we already have an ohel. As long as the top part of what you built a little teepee, but as long as the top part is a tefach, a fist wide, so let's say you took a bar that is a tefach, like a 2x4. It's approximately a tefach. Let's assume halachically for a moment is you run a 2x4 across the top of the boat and you just drape a tarp on it. So then you can spread it out more, no problem, because you're just being mosif al ohel arai. That's totally mutter because there's at least a tefach on the top. Very good. So that's the principle. We've learned about this before. One of the most practical applications of this is a stroller where you already have the rain cover on the stroller. So then to extend it to cover the baby is mosif al ohel arai. But to put the rain cover all together, mechadash, on Shabbos, that's an isur d'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to do that. Good. Continues the Gemara. Hanu dichri, there were some rams. Tahavu le the Rav Huna, he had some animals. Dibiyamama ba'utula. During the day, he needed some shade. Uvelelia ba'uavira. But at night, he wanted it to be a little bit more airy. What should he do? Asalakame de Rab. So he went to go ask the great Amora of Rab. Amarle zil kruch budya b'shir batefach. What you should do is you should take some cloth and just make sure that at the top that it's a tefach, so you already have an ohel. Same thing. And then what you can do, the machar pashta, then tomorrow you can spread it out, umosiv alo el araihu v'shapir dami. So at night you can leave it open. During the day you can cover it because it's mutter to be mosiv al ohel arai. 6 lines from the bottom, more cases of ohel. Amar Rab mishum Rabbi Chia, vilon mutter lintoso mutter leforko b'Shabbos. One is allowed to put up and take down a vilon, which is typically a window shade of some kind, the details of which we'd have to get into the Rishonim. What does Rashi say here? Where is Rashi? I don't see a Rashi here on this. Where is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Keneged hapesach litznius. Yeah, it's basically like our versions of shades, just things separating. So you're allowed to use those on Shabbos. You know, when we were growing up, and I have them in some of my children's houses, we had these blackout shades that were on a roller, and you'd pull down, and then it would bounce back up. So is that what it's talking about? Is it talking about turning blinds? We have more sophisticated technology in ours. So those are all questions that need to be answered by the poskim. Next case. Kilas chasanim mutter leforka v'lintosa b'Shabbos. Kilas chasanim. We learned about this in Maseches Shabbos as well. Maseches Shabbos daf mem hey. So that was about 200 blot ago, give or take. And what did we learn there? Akilas chasanim is basically like it's a bed that has like fabric draped over it, but the fabric is laying on one bar that grows across the bed, so it looks really like a teepee, and the top is very narrow. So let's see what's going on here. Kilas chasanim mutter leforka b'lintosa b'Shabbos, mutter to use. When is it mutter to use? And the next collection of qualifications is applying to kilas chasanim. Amar Rav Sheshes b'rei Rav Idi lo amron. When do we say that kilas chasanim is mutter? Ela she'ein begaga tefach. It's only provided that you are not making it new on Shabbos where it is a tefach wide. You can't make the ohel on Shabbos. So if the bar that you're draping the fabric over is 2 tefachim, you cannot throw that over on Shabbos. You just made an ohel because now the top of the teepee is wider at the top. The top of the teepee is now going to be more than 1 tefach. If it's less, then it's totally mutter because that's not an ohel. And still, aval yesh begaga tefach, if in fact the top of the bar at the top where you drape the fabric over your bed is a tefach at the top, that would be usher. That's a siyas ohel arai. Not allowed to do that on Shabbos. V'chi ein begaga tefach. If the bar at the top is less, it's half a tefach. It's a very small piece of wood, a rod of some kind. So v'chi ein begaga tefach. Lo amran ela she'ein bepachos mishlosha samach legag tefach. We have to make sure that within 3 tefachim that it isn't 1 tefach wide. What does that mean? So that would mean like this. If let's say that my thumbs were at the 3 tefach mark, right? So then as the teepee gets a little wider when it comes down, when you get to 3 tefach into the teepee, so where my thumbs are, ki'ilu, is that going to be a tefach wide? And it has to be less. So the slope here is tiny, a very, very small slope. We'll learn more about the slope in a moment. Aval yesh b'pachos mishlosha samuch legag tefach asr. That would not be okay. V'chi ein b'pachos mishlosha samuch legag tefach nami. Even when it's less than 1 tefach at 3 tefachim down from the top. Lo amran ella she'ein b'shipua. Turning to the top of Kuf Beis and Beis b'shipua tefach. Aval yesh b'shipua tefach shipui ahalim ke'ahalim damot. So Rashi here points out, and there's a picture here in the Meforshim that there's like a midline to the tarp and to the tent that you're making, to the covering of the bed. So from the midline, it can't be a tefach in either direction. So the slope is tiny. The Meforshim here point out that this bed is not, you literally cannot sleep in this bed. There's no room. It's too small. But okay, just dealing with the halachos shabbat. V'amar Rav Shisha b'rei d'Rav Idi. Let's apply this then even further. Saina shari, to wear a particular kind of hat that was a commonplace to wear. So the Saina people would wear these hats. Okay, wait a minute. How can you wear these hats? Take a look at Rashi. Saina shari, kova shel levet. It was a hat made of felt. Shekoran palteri, mutter latzeis bo b'shabbos. You're allowed to wear this hat. So it says the Gemara, third line, Vatanya aser. It's very nice, Rav Shisha b'rei Rav Idi, that you're saying that it's mutter, but you're an amora. And we have a brisa that says nothing doing. It says that it's aser. Lokasha, hada'iz bei tefach, hadales bei tefach. It depends. If the brim of the hat is a tefach, so then you have an oel arai. That's when the brisa says it's aser. But when Rav Shisha b'rei Rav Idi was saying that it's mutter, hadales bei tefach, is when the brim was less than one tefach. Elameata, if that's true, says the Gemara, a fascinating question that really does require analysis. The Gemara says, Sharviv, biglime tefach. So let's say you take your coat and you cape it open. Oh, I made an ohel. Why is that any different than my hat that has a tefach? So the comparison requires analysis because the brim of my hat is an ohel, like opening up my coat. The comparison, okay? Nevertheless, not only does the Gemara give this comparison, but it embraces it. Ella, we therefore change our answer. How does Rav Shisha b'rei Rav Idi say his shita that the hat is mutter when the brisa says it's aser? Ella lo kashya had mehadek. It depends how tight the hat is. Namely, we're concerned that it might blow off and you might pick it up. If the hat is going to be fitted, good. This raises some interesting halachic shilas. Can you wear your hat without an eruv on a rainy day? On a windy day, excuse me, if it's going to blow your hat off, there's a concern you might pick it up. That's unacceptable. So these are shilas in the poskim. On our hats, actually, in the hats that they make, we don't use it this way, but they have a little hole in the lapel. You're supposed to undo the string from around and stick it through your button so that if it gets all windy, I think mine is stitched. No, and mine is stitched closed. So I think they're all stitched closed. I don't know. I think it's just.
It's so windy now. You need it now.
Of all times to need it, yes. But then it gets stretched and it never comes back to normal. You can't fix those things. Okay, let's talk about Gashmias later. Says the Gemara, 7 lines down, Kuf Beis and Beis, next Mishnah. Now we're going to be talking about some types of door hinges and Makeh B'Patish issues. Let's continue. Machzir and Sir HaTachton B'Mikdash. Let's say you have a door that has multiple hinges. The bottom one came out. In the Mikdash, you're allowed to fix it. Isser Derabanan. Avalo B'Medina. And as mentioned, because in the Mikdash, the Kohanim are Zrizanheim, we're not concerned they're going to violate Isur Doraisa. So therefore, we don't have any rabbinic injunctions in the Mishnah, almost never. And here is another one of those exceptions. Another one of, not an exception, this is actually the rule where in a mikdash, ein shvus, you're allowed to fix the bottom hinge of alob medina. V'ha'elyon, if the top one breaks, kan v'kan aser. Both in the Medina and in the mikdash, it would be aser. That's makeh b'patish. You need the top hinge. I actually have this right now in one of my houses. The top hinge is perfect. The bottom hinge, all the screws fell out. You know what I've done to that hinge? Nothing. It's still sitting there broken. What do you see from there? The door is still functional. But if the top hinge is broken, gravity does its thing and it yanks the bottom hinge out too. So you can't fix the top hinge. Perfect. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, just like we saw in the previous Amud in the Mishnah, we saw Rabbi Yehuda was one step more lenient than the Tanakama here too. Oh, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ha'elyon, if the top part broke b'mikdash, that's allowed in the mikdash, ve'atachton b'medina. And you're allowed to fix the upper one in a mikdash. You're allowed to fix the lower one in a Medina. And kol shekain in the mikdash. Tanu Rabbanan, says the Gemara, we have a brisa that speaks about the following. Tzir, you have a hinge. Tzir delas sheda tevo migdal, b'mikdash machzirin, b'medina dochkin. So we have different dinim in the mikdash where we say machzirin, and b'medina it is dochkin. What does dochkin mean? So take a look at, where is this? Here you go. Of Medina Dochkin, take a look at Rashi, 2/3 of the way down. Dibur Maschil of Medina Dochkin, Im Lo Yatza Kulo. If it hasn't totally come out, Michur Haiskupa, from the hinge on the door, you can push the rest of it back in. And it gives a French word for whatever that means. That's what Dochkin means, but you can't be Machzirin in total. So the way that our hinges are made is that we have multiple overlapping things and they put a screw through the top that keeps everything in place. If it partially comes out, you're allowed to tap it back into Medina. That's considered permissible according to Reb Yehuda. I think I lost my spot here. No, that was even according to the Tanakama. And the Medina Dochkin, Elyon, if it falls out, kan v'kan lo yachzer. This is what the Brisa says, that if the top one falls out, whether or not you're in the Mikdash or in the Medina, we do not allow it. Kuf Beis Amud Beis, we're about 10, 12 lines down. Says the Gemara, why in the Reisha were we concerned about the Medina Dochkin? Why would we not be allowed to be Machzer? Gzeira Shema Yitka. What we were concerned about is that you might hammer it in a permanent way, and that would be a big problem because the imtaka chayiv chatas. If you did hammer it in a more permanent way, you'd be chayiv chatas of makeh b'patish. That's totally unacceptable. Or boneh. I have to get into the Rishonim about how we're machalek between makeh b'patish and boneh when they seem to be identical. Continues the Gemara. Continues the Mishnah, excuse me. No, Gemara. Shel bor v'shel dos v'shel yatzia. What are these three things? So Rashi here, Rashi is the first of the middle with lines. Rashi says, Dahavi binyan hamechuber lekarka, chashu binyan koldehu. These things are attached to the ground. So when you fix doors in these types of locations, we're very concerned about that. Being hichsir, chayiv chatas, that's not allowed. That's an isser doraisa. Opens the next Mishnah. What about bandages? What about putting on bandages on Shabbos? This past Friday, I did a bris from family, and right before I left the house, he said it's going to be Shabbos tomorrow. How do we put on the bandage? There's ointment on it. What about mimareach? We're not allowed to spread things. That's a big problem in halacha. That's why we don't use bars of soap on Shabbos, which is mimareach. We don't use stick deodorant. We don't use chapstick. All of those because serious isurim. They have different versions of chapstick, some of which are more oils. Big shaila if the consistency is more of a gel or if the consistency is more of like a thicker liquid like Blistex. Is kind of more of like a hand lotion type of thing. Those are big shilas in the poskim. Rabbi gets into this about how bad are your hands. If your hands are super bad, then b'shinu you can put on a very liquidy type of lotion. Good. Says the Gemara as follows: Machzirin ritia b'mikdash. After a Kohen does his avodah, he's not supposed to have a hefsek between his begadim for the big day kahuna and his body. But if he has to do the avodah, then he has to make sure that he takes off his bandages fine. Afterwards, machzirin ritia b'mikdash. You're allowed to put the bandage back on Shabbos, no problem at all. Avalo b'medina, but you're not allowed to do that outside of the mikdash because ein shvus b'mikdash. But we are concerned about isur d'Rabbanan outside of the mikdash in betchila. But if you're putting a bandage on for the first time, kan v'kan asur, that is not allowed. Opens the Gemara. Tanu Rabban and the Rabbi taught us, Retiya Shapir Shamei Al Gabe Makav. If a person's wearing a band-aid and it completely falls off of him, so you have a big bandage on your arm and it totally falls off. Machzir no soba Shabbos, says the Tanna Kama, you're allowed to put it back. Rabbi Yehuda Omer Hochla Kalamat, if it slips downwards a little bit, Doch Kalamala, you can push it back up. And as well, Lemala, if it slips upwards, then Doch Kalamata, you can push it back so that the bandage can cover the injury. And as well, let's say that your bandage is here, you can lift up the further one and clean the makkah and lift up the other side and clean the makkah as per the needs. That's permissible. But you cannot clean off the bandage itself because we're afraid that you might start smearing things and that would be problematic. This is Mamash and Isur D'Oraisa as discussed, one of the 39 malachos mentioned in the Mishnah on Shabbos and Gimel, the Mishnah that discusses all of the 39 malachos. And Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, halacha, Rabbi Yehuda, we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda in this case. Amar Rav Chizda lo shanu. Remember earlier we said in the name of the Tanna Kama that if a bandage falls off, you can fix it. When is that true? Lo shanu, that you can fix the bandage when it falls off of you. Lo shanu ela shepir shal gabe kli. That's if it falls and like lands on your plate, and then you can put it back. Aval pir shal gabe karka. But if in fact it falls on the ground, so then to put it back on would be like you're starting from scratch, and therefore that would be Asr, Divrei HaKol Asr. We're 2/3 of the way down, Kuf Beis and Beis. Let's continue. Amar Mar, Bar Ravashi, Hava Ka'imna Kame Abba. He said, I was standing in front of my father, Amar Mar Bar Ravashi. So this is the son of Ravashi. He said, I was standing in front of Ravashi. So again, a very late story in the Amoraim. Naflale Abe Sadia, and his bandage fell off and it fell on a bench. And he put it back on. So says the Gemara, how could you do that? His son said respectfully to his father, Amin alei, I said to him, Lo savar lamara Abba, don't you hold the Hada Amar of Chizda, Machlokes Shapir Shal Gabe Akli? That when did the Tanna Kama and Rabbi Yehuda argue? That's only in regards to when it falls on a Kli. Aval Pir Shal Gabe Karka Aser. But if it falls on the ground, then it's like your mom is putting on a new bandage. That's not allowed. So says the Gemara, the Amar Shmuel Halacha Rabbi Yehuda. And in that case, the din is that we held like Rabbi Yehuda. So how can you say that you're allowed to do this? That should not be allowed. Amar Li, Ravashi said back to his son, Lo Shmieli, I didn't hear of this. What do you mean Lo Shmieli? Says the Gemara, remember that's an uncommon thing to hear from Ravashi because he was the author, not the author, but he was the malakit for Shas. So he should have heard every din of Shmuel. How could he not have heard? So then the Gemara says, Klomar Lo Sibirali. So that's a good historical methodological piece that we need to assume that Ravashi was not hidden from anything in the Amoraim. He must have known nearly everything. If it made it into the Gemara and he was the editor in chief, so then you got to see all the statements of Shmuel because it made it into the Gemara. So that's why the Gemara has to give another explanation of Klomar lo svirally, that he does not hold of that opinion. Next Mishnah. We know that in the Beis HaMikdash that the Levim would play instruments. What would happen if an instrument would break? There are some mitzvos in the Torah that within the Beis HaMikdash that one has to be involved with playing music, the Levim. It says the Gemara, shockingly, koshrin nima b'mikdash. If one of the strings of a harp were to break, you're allowed to fix it. Koshrin, you can do kosher. Aval lo b'medina. You're allowed to do this in the Mikdash, but not in the Medina. So right at the opening of the, where's the Rashi here? Rashi here is 6, 7 lines, 8 lines from the bottom of the page. The first one on the Mishnah, Dibur Masel Kosher Nima, Nimas Kinor Shel Shir Halavim Lekorban Im Nifseka B'Shabbos. This is what we're talking about, that if one of the kli shir, one of the strings of the harp breaks, so then the din is that you're allowed to do kosher. Uvegamar, first time, Adikasavre, Machshirei Mitzvah, Shelo haya yachol lasosan me'esmol to hayom nifseka doche es haShabbos, to fix the kli of a harp on Shabbos if it broke on Shabbos is machshirei mitzvah. Unbelievable. That is a wild idea. We have this by bris milah, according to some of the Tanaim as well, that you can do Isurei Daraisa to be machshir mitzvah, whatever it is. Usually we speak about Isurei Darabanan, about caring through a karmelis. But here, this machshirei mitzvah is a din daraisa, so don't make the mistake. Up until now, when we've spoken about mikdash, we've said ein shvus b'mikdash, that it's only a din derabanan. So that din derabanan is mutter in the mikdash because we say ein shvus b'mikdash. This is an iser d'oraisa. It should be an iser d'oraisa, but because it's machshirei mitzvah for the Levim to play the harp, therefore, even if a string breaks on Shabbos, you're allowed to fix. And we're going to analyze that in some depth now. And that will almost, we have one more Mishnah after this for tonight, but let's continue. We have 14 minutes till Ma'ariv. Says the Gemara. Oh, let me finish the Mishnah. Kosher nima b'mikdash aval lo b'medina. You're allowed to tie the harp string even on Shabbos, Isser Daraisa, aval lo b'medina. Pashut, you can't do it elsewhere. Not because it's an Isser Darabanan, but because it's a Malacha Daraisa. You can't restring your guitar on Shabbos, even if it breaks on Shabbos, because you can't play guitar on Shabbos because we have an Isser Darabanan of playing music. Why do we have an Isser Darabanan of playing music? Shema Yataka and Klishir, because you might come to fix it, which is an Isser Daraisa. So Pashut, you're not allowed to do that. So just making a contrast, this Mishnah is talking about the Din Daraisa of Kosher, which we say is mutter in the Mikdash because of Machshirei Mitzvah. Or a min who says in Gemara, wait a minute. This Mishnah seems to have a competitor. Nemas kinor shenifseka. If you have a string of a harp that broke, lo haya kosher ela onva. You can't do kosher. You can only do onva. You can only tie a bow, which according to many is only nisr derabanan. We saw a shita in the Gemara, directly in the Gemara a few blot ago, that says that an aniva is a kesher ma'al yahu. It's actually considered an isser d'oraisa to tie the bow. Remember, we were discussing this in this parak about a motzei tefillin. What if you find tefillin and it's not yet tied? Maybe we should tie it into a bow. Is a bow an isser d'oraisa? Does it count to be a knot? Because a knot's halacha l'moshe misina. We spoke about this earlier. So this is what the brisa says, and this brisa contrasts with our Mishnah because the brisa says you're not allowed to do kosher, but our Mishnah says you are allowed to do kosher. Lo kasha, says the Gemara 6 lines from the bottom. Lo kasha ha rabbanon ha Rabbi Eliezer. Big machlokes here. The Rabbi Eliezer damar machshirei mitzvah dochen es haShabbos koshra. According to Rabbi Eliezer, who says, as mentioned in Rashi, and as is the gist of this Mishnah here, that we're discussing machshirei mitzvah in fixing the harp koshra. That's when our Mishnah says that's a sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, the Rabbanon. But according to the Rabbanon damrei ein dochen, who say no, you're not allowed to be machal Shabbos. Yes, you need to fix the klei shir, but not in a permanent way. Only onva. You tie a bow, and that should be sufficient. Rabbi asks the Gemara in the Shita, Rabbi Eliezer, I don't understand. If Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's machshirei mitzvah, then afilu lechatchila nami. Then you should be able to do this even if you forgot to fix the harp before Shabbos. You should be able to fix it even on Shabbos. Yet if you attribute our Mishnah to Rabbi Eliezer, look back at our Mishnah. What's the last line? If Shabbos started with the strings broken, kan v'kan aser. Even in the mikdash, it would be aser. So your answer to say that the Mishnah is Rabbi Eliezer and the Bryce is the Rabbanan doesn't work, because if Rabbi Eliezer's shita is that it's machshirei mitzvah, so then I don't understand why would it only be b'di'evet aflechatchila nami. It should be even if Shabbos started and you knew it was already broken from before. But machshirei mitzvah, you're supposed to fix it. So therefore, the Gemara says this answer doesn't work. Ella, 2 lines from the bottom. How do we solve the contradiction? Our Mishnah says you're allowed to do kosher for a broken string for a kinor, and the Brisa says no. How does this work out? Rabbi Yehuda was the shita that we saw earlier, who says that an aniva is a kesher ma'al yasei. Last line. Take a look at the very last line of the page in Rashi. Dibur hamaskil v'Rabbi Yehuda dimuk minan masnisan alibe. Our Mishnah is like him. The kosher ab malachahi. The kosher ab malachahi. The last two words are leaning into the question of the Gemara. So he holds that it's an issur d'oraisa. Kosher aniva, it's the same thing. The Rabbanan hold that aniva, that tying a bow, is less bad. It's an issur d'Rabbanan, and therefore they're the brisa. So namely, our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. And if our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, so that makes perfect sense, except for one problem. Rabbi Yehuda, liba deman. In regards to being machshir mitzvah, is this machshirei mitzvah? Yes or no? Rabbi Yehuda, liba deman. Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer ka'amar. If Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that a bow is just the same as kosher, it's a kesher ma'al yasahi, then afilu lechatchila nami, we're back to the same question, which is that if Rabbi Yehuda holds that it's a bow, and you're saying that it's mutter because of machshirei mitzvah, then why? Same question we asked against Rabbi Eliezer. It should be mutter even b'di'evet. Yeah, that's not what the Mishnah says. Ela lo kashya ha de Reb Shimon ha Rabbanan. It's just a straight up machlokas, two different brisas. What does the Gemara say? Harab Shimon, Harabbana, the Tanya. The Brisa writes explicitly different shitas. Ben Levi, if you have a person who's a Levi, he's in the Mikdash. Shenifsika lonima bikin, or one of his strings breaks. Koshra. One shita says you can be kosher, and the next shita, Rabbi Shimon Omer, onva, you can tie a bow. Last shita in the Brisa. In this new brisa, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer afhi eina mashma sesakol. No, the bow doesn't work because when you tie a bow, the sound is not kishmak, which is amazing. Because if the sound is not kishmak, we change our psak for how to tie the bow. So then, what do you do then? Ela mishalshel milamata v'korich milamala, or mishalshel milamala v'korich milamata. I have a guitar at home, and at the end there's a knob. And how does the knob work? You tighten to get the right key. Now, at that end, the reason why the tightening works is because all the extra cord is wrapped around a knob. So the way theirs will work, they had two knobs at each end. So what he's saying is that tying the bow won't help. What you should do is kind of roll it so that you can, instead of tying a knot, you'll just kind of tighten on the other end to make sure that the rope could then work and make the appropriate sound. But a bow doesn't work. So that's better than tying a knot. So what do we see from here? What we see from here is that we have the brises that are giving us all of our shitas. The Mishnah is according to the shita of the Tanakama. And the second shita, the Brisa, is according to the shita of Rabbi Shimon. Very good answer. Okay, next, V'ibay Sema, Hava Harabanan. Some people give a different answer, Hava Harabanan. Really, both of these are talking about the shita of the Rabbanan, who hold that an aniva is the Rabbanan. But Lokashia kan be'emtza, kan minatzad. It depends. One case is talking about either the Mishnah or the Brisa. One's talking about be'emtza, where the tear is in the middle. You can only be kosher in such a case. Kan minatzad. There we would not say that you would tie a knot. There we would say that you would do aniva. V'bayisema, the last answer. V'bayisema hava hava emtza. Some people say no, the tear is both in the middle, marsavar gazrin and a marsavar lo gazrin. And some say that we have a rabbinic injunction. We're afraid that someone might make a mistake not under these circumstances. And some say that whether or not the gzeira applies, yes or no. Last sugya. We're going to do about 15 more lines, 10, 12 more lines, and then we're going to stop. 8 minutes until Marv. Sorry for the longer shir, just a lot of material. Says the Mishnah, Chodchen yaveles b'mikdash. You have an animal that needs to be brought for a korban, but it has a mum. You're allowed to remove the mum on Shabbos in the mikdash. Avalo b'medina. Is this an issur d'oraisa or an issur d'rabbanan? We'll see in the Gemara. Be'im b'kli. But if in fact you're using a utensil, kan v'kan aser, implying that the Reish is talking about biyad, so you're allowed to tear it off biyadayim in order to make the animal mutter for a korban. Do you smell something burning? Smell? Oh, okay. That's true.
Everything in the kitchen was black.
Okay. Says the Gemara, Chodchen yaveles b'mikdash. If it's a chum, it makes perfect sense. I didn't think about that. So then the Gemara is going to now ask a question on this. So Raminhu, we have a question, a head-to-head contradiction. That's always Raminhu, two Tanaic sources, one against another. In regards to animals here, kivu, you can carry it on your back. You can also carry, if one were to then also carry it michutz l'tchum. And the chatichas yivalto, all three of these things, ein doch, and you're not allowed. Who's the author of this? Stam. That's important. We'll get to that in a second. Rabbi Eliezer Omer Dochen. Rabbi Eliezer was of the opinion that it's Dochen, that it is mutter to do on Shabbos. So that's a question because our Mishnah is Stam, doesn't have a name, and the Resha, the Tanakama of this Brisa is Stam. Two Stam Mishnahs against one another. Sounds like a contradiction. Answers the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina. They each give their own answer. Chad Amar Hava Havalacha. Both of them are talking about a moist yaveles. Let's call it a wart of some kind, whatever it is. So they're both moist. Velokashya kan biyad kan b'kli. One's an isser derabanan, one's an isser deraisa. Therefore, one's permissible, one's not. The Chad Amar Hava Havayad. Really, both of them were being done biyad. Vilokasha, habelacha, v'habiyavesha. They're both being done by hand, but one is an isser deraisa because it's still lach. That's not allowed. That was the brisa. And habiyabasha, biyavesha, the other one is dry. That's the one in our Mishnah, which is permissible because the dry skin, when you tear off dry skin, when you break off a dead tree branch, that's not an isser deraisa. And now, why do these two Amoraim disagree with each other? This was Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina. Each of them said opposite things, but it looks very similar. One of them says the distinction is that it was belacha, and the other one said that we were talking about doing this bikli. So says the Gemara, we're about a third of the way down. Kuf Gimel Amanal Fulamand Amar, according to the one who says Habiyad v'Habikli, that the distinction should be made between whether or not you did the Maisa with your hands versus using a utensil. My time alo Amar Habalacha Habiyavesha. Why didn't you say the distinction of the other Amor? He said I couldn't. Amar Lach Yavesha Filu B'Kli Namishar, because if it was dry, there would be no isser of cutting it with a cleat. That's not where the isser derives. He says I couldn't say what you want to say. That doesn't work. Your answer is not a good answer. My time. What's the reason why? Because when it's Yavesha, the skin is ifruche ifracha. The skin is just it's just layers of dead skin. It'll just fall right off. So that's not an isser deraisa. And what about the other way? According to the one who said not like kli versus yad, but that no, it depends whether or not the growth itself was moist or if the skin was dead. My time alo amar habiyad habikli. Why didn't you make the distinction of the other amora? Amar lach, halfway down he said because. Look in the Mishnah B'Kli. How could you make a distinction of biyad and kli? Hatznanim b'kli, kan b'kan haser. The Mishnah says kli, so you can't say oh biyad or b'kli. The Mishnah says it's a kli, so you can't say what you want to say. I v'idach. So then, what would the other shita say? If in fact what you're saying is true, that it's habiyad, that our Mishnah says b'kli, how could that other amora have distinguished and said habiyad habikli? Says the Gemara, hadikatani hasam. The fact that it said on the Mishnah b'kli was mishub the kaboy ifluge Rebbe Elazar v'Rabbanan, because that issue is subject to a machlokes elsewhere between Rebbe Elazar and the Rabbanan. Okay, v'idach, if that's the answer as to why there is the case of kli, then maybe you should have gone back and said the distinction of kli versus yad. Says the Gemara, I couldn't. V'idach, dumya dehir kivo v'havas mechutz etchum ktani d'Rabbanan. The reason why they taught that, the case of kli in our Mishnah, is to make it similar to here kivu v'havas mechutz etchum, those two cases. He says, no, that's not correct. V'idach, the other teacher would say back, no. The case of here kivu, why was that brought? Not to contrast with kli versus yad, but to loki Reb Nasan. That was taught. That was just to exclude the possibility of thinking that we held like Reb Nasan, that maybe the reason why it's mutter to carry a tree is because of chayin oseis atzmo. It's not. And therefore it's aser. Hava asa mechutz l'tchum, and the reason why the second case of the Mishnah was brought of hava asa mechutz l'tchum, transferring the animal from one rishus to another, which our Mishnah says was aser, not because of yad or kli, but Rabbi Akiva. The reason why that was brought was because damar tchum and d'oraisa, to make sure that we were factoring in the shita of Rabbi Akiva of tchum and d'oraisa. So each of them have their own shitas. We're going to stop right here by Masiv Rav Yosef. We'll pick up Emir Hashem on Shabbos with another blot and a half. That will bring us to the Mishnah on Kuf Daled Amud Beis, about a third of the way down. We'll save the last Amud Emir Hashem for the Siyum on Sunday night. Wishing you all a beautiful night.